Let's start with a picture that every investor and entrepreneur knows too well: the rise of the so-called visionary founder. The one who promises to change the world. You know the type. Confident, articulate, maybe wearing a black turtleneck or messy hair that screams, "Genius at work." Now imagine two of them, one in Silicon Valley and the other in the Bahamas, both selling dreams so massive that almost no one dared to question them. That's right, we're talking about Elizabeth Holmes and Sam Bankman-Fried, two modern tech idols who went from untouchable heroes to global cautionary tales. But how did that transformation happen? How did two people convince some of the brightest investors and journalists in the world that they had built revolutionary technologies, only to later be unmasked as fraudsters? The answer lies in a perfect cocktail of charisma, social proof, and storytelling. It's a formula that has repeated itself time and again in the tech industry. In both stories, the product was less important than the narrative. And in a world driven by hype, narrative is the real currency. Let's rewind to the early 2000s. Silicon Valley was booming with the idea that technology could solve anything, from disease to poverty to financial inequality. Investors were desperate for the next Steve Jobs, someone young and brilliant who could disrupt entire sectors. Into that stage walked Elizabeth Holmes, barely in her 20s, with a bold promise to revolutionize blood testing. Just a few drops of blood, she said, and you could detect hundreds of diseases instantly. Imagine the appeal of that pitch. Cheaper healthcare, faster diagnosis, massive profits. It seemed untouchable. Now jump forward to the crypto boom, a decade later. This time the promise shifted from medicine to money itself. Sam Bankman-Fried, or SBF as everyone called him, had a different mission: to build a safe, reliable, and ethical exchange for trading digital assets. He called it FTX. It quickly became one of the biggest crypto platforms on the planet, with billions in user deposits and an image of almost monk-like altruism. SBF presented himself as the math genius who didn't care about luxury, just about doing effective altruism, using wealth for good. Sounds familiar, right? Here. Both founders had something rare. They embodied the fantasies of their eras. Holmes became the female Jobs, the young, brilliant woman defying the male-dominated biotech world. Bankman-Fried embodied the crypto ethos, chaotic, contrarian, and unpolished. Every appearance reinforced the myth. Holmes dressed in black, lowered her voice to seem older and wiser, and spoke of her mission to change healthcare forever. SBF went in the opposite direction, with messy hair, t-shirts, and cargo shorts, even during investor meetings, signaling that he was too focused on big ideas to care about appearances. And people loved it. The media devoured those images because they made fantastic stories. Investors followed because other investors were following. It's the classic feedback loop of hype. The more attention they got, the more legitimate they seemed. And when you have names like Rupert Murdoch or Sequoia Capital writing checks, few people dare to ask tough questions. The credibility of others becomes the proof. But let's slow down here, because this part is crucial. Both FTX and Theranos emerged at moments when people were desperate for a new hero. In Holmes's time, Silicon Valley was hungry for a woman founder who could match the success of her male predecessors. In SBF's time, crypto was struggling with its image. Scams, volatility, and distrust everywhere. So a relatable, almost nerdy genius who spoke about ethics felt like the perfect savior. The context made them believable. Now you might be wondering, how do investors fall for ideas that, looking back, seem almost absurd? The answer isn't that the investors were stupid, it's that they were human. People love good stories more than they love spreadsheets. A vision that promises to change the world is far more seductive than a balanced financial report. And when someone speaks with enough conviction, wears the right costume, and attracts the right audience, logic tends to step aside. That's the psychology of narrative. Investing. Let's take Holmes first. She dropped out of Stanford at 19. That instantly gave her the aura of a young prodigy, like Gates or Zuckerberg. She promised to democratize healthcare through her tiny blood testing device called Edison. She said it could perform hundreds of tests with only a few drops of blood. Sounded incredible, and it was. Literally incredible. But when investors and partners asked for data, they were told it was proprietary. Secrecy became part of the mystique. Everyone assumed the breakthrough must be real, because it had to be. Who would lie so confidently to so many powerful people? SBF pulled off a similar trick with transparency of a different kind. He made everything seem open. Tweets, interviews, podcasts, he was everywhere. Talking about crypto regulation, charity, even his political donations. His "I have nothing to hide" attitude made him appear trustworthy. But behind the scenes, FTX was funneling customer funds to his hedge fund. Alameda Research, it was like running a casino while secretly borrowing chips from the players' wallets. Yet the illusion of openness blinded everyone. What both founders sold wasn't just a product, it was meaning. Holmes sold hope. Faster, cheaper, universal diagnostics. Bankman-Fried sold fairness, a financial system built by and for the people. Those ideas resonated deeply with investors wanting to believe they were changing the world, too. You can almost see how easily it happened. A few positive headlines, a couple of high-profile endorsements, and the momentum became unstoppable. And when money starts pouring in, curiosity goes out the window. The fear of missing out, FOMO, as you probably know, is one of the strongest market forces. No one wants to be the fool who passed on the next Google. So, when everyone else is clapping, you clap too. There's also a practical detail worth considering. Both companies operated in fields that are extremely hard for outsiders to understand. Few investors really know how laboratory diagnostics work. And even fewer truly understand crypto infrastructure, smart contracts, or liquidity pools. That complexity creates a fog where even experts hesitate to say, "I don't get it." In that fog, charisma becomes the guiding light. And both Holmes and SBF knew exactly how to shine. Think about it. The typical startup founder story follows a pattern. It begins with a big problem, a crazy idea, some early believers, and rapid growth. Both FTX and Theranos fit perfectly into that mold, at least at first. Holmes attracted board members like former secretaries of state and military generals, people with power but no medical background. SBF attracted venture capital giants with billions in dry powder who were terrified of missing the crypto wave. Both groups trusted stories over data. Holmes's rise had Hollywood flavor. Forbes covers, TED Talks, black turtlenecks, the works. At one point, she was the youngest self-made female billionaire. Her company was valued at $9 billion, despite having almost no verified technology. Investors saw what they wanted to see: a narrative of innovation and inclusivity. Meanwhile, at FTX's peak, the firm was valued at over $30 billion. SBF was on stage with world leaders, celebrities like Tom Brady, and sports arenas bearing his brand. Again, people saw success and assumed safety. What's fascinating is how both founders used language as a tool. Holmes spoke in moral absolutes. It's about saving lives, turning any critique into an attack on progress itself. SBF spoke in probabilities and abstract math, expected value, risk optimization, which made him sound like a philosopher king of finance. Different styles, same outcome. They made complexity either sacred or inaccessible. And that's how you discourage questions. Yet for all their differences, the core dynamic was identical, a blend of hubris and belief amplified by a culture that worships disruption. Silicon Valley and crypto share a dangerous idea, that moving fast and breaking things is not only acceptable but necessary. In that mindset, traditional checks like audits or regulation are seen as obstacles, not protections. The end goal justifies any means. And if you're promising a future so bright, who cares about the dark corners of the present? Now, doesn't that sound like a recipe for disaster? It always starts with idealism. The founder truly believes they're building something world-changing. Then comes the shortcut. A small compromise to keep the dream alive. Maybe fake a demo just for one investor meeting, or borrow client funds just until the next big deal clears. They tell themselves it's necessary, maybe even noble, and before long, the line between visionary and fraudster disappears. Holmes's lie began as a prototype problem. The Edison machines didn't work well enough. Instead of admitting it, she doubled down. Hiding failures and manipulating results, SBF's lie began as a liquidity problem. Alameda lost money, and he secretly covered the gap with customer deposits. In both stories, transparency could have saved them early. But transparency kills magic, and magic was their business model. If you think about it, both Theranos and FTX show how modern markets now reward perception over performance. Media headlines can inflate valuations faster than any real innovation can justify. In that environment, the person who controls the narrative controls the money. And these founders were master storytellers until reality caught up. But before we dive into the inevitable collapse, there's something important to note. Neither Holmes nor SBF acted alone. Behind them stood entire ecosystems of enablers, investors, journalists, regulators, and fans, all willing to look away as long as the story was good. We'll talk more about that later, but for now, remember this. Every con artist needs an audience that wants to be conned. So, as we close this first chapter, take a moment to think about what these two founders represent. They didn't just fool people, they revealed how badly we all want to believe in simple, heroic solutions to complex problems. The fantasy of the genius founder isn't going anywhere because it feeds something deeper, our collective craving for hope. And as we'll see, that craving can turn deadly when combined with unchecked money and power. Ready for what comes next? Because things are about to get messy, very messy. By now, you've probably realized one key thing about both FTX and Theranos. They didn't just sell products, they sold fantasies. Slick, seductive, emotionally charged fantasies. These weren't companies, they were stages, and every press release or investor meeting was a performance. The audience wanted to believe, and the actors delivered exactly what that audience paid to see. In Theranos' case, the fantasy was wrapped in the language of healthcare altruism. Elizabeth Holmes wasn't just promoting a gadget. She was promising a revolution that could change millions of lives. That emotional hook made skepticism feel almost immoral. After all, who wants to be the one doubting a woman trying to cure disease? So the narrative became bigger than the itself. It was about disruption, empowerment, and democratization. All the buzzwords Silicon Valley eats for breakfast. Now, let's jump to the crypto scene. Sam Bankman-Fried's story hinged on a different kind of fantasy, the dream of financial freedom. The crypto world has always carried a rebellious spirit, a down with the banks attitude. SBF leaned into that perfectly. He built FTX as the platform of the people, efficient, ethical, and fearless. A modern-day Robin Hood with a keyboard. But behind that image of chaotic brilliance lay the same strategy as Holmes's. Dominate the conversation, feed the hype, and let perception do the heavy lifting. Hype works in predictable stages. First, you drop the impossible promise, something so ambitious that, at least emotionally, it feels inevitable. Then you surround yourself with validators, journalists, celebrities, politicians, and investors who can amplify your credibility. Finally, you use FOMO, the fear of missing out, to close the loop. Once everyone else believes, you don't need to prove anything. The collective belief itself becomes proof. Take Holmes, for example. She didn't just claim her technology worked, she created an entire mythology around it. Storefronts started popping up in Walgreens across the United States, perfectly branded, sleek, and futuristic. The idea was not to actually test blood. It was to create a visible illusion of success. When people saw those centers, they assumed the product must already be working. That's how hype mimics legitimacy. Physical presence convinces even the sharpest minds. FTX pulled off a digital version of that. Every major sports arena, influencer, and event bore the company's logo. They even bought the naming rights to a stadium in Miami. The message was simple. We're not just another crypto startup. We're here to stay. And once you achieve ubiquity, when your brand becomes unavoidable, skepticism feels like contrarianism. Who questions something that everyone knows? Another critical weapon in building hype is confidence. Both founders had it in excess. Holmes's deep baritone voice and laser-eye stare mesmerized investors. She spoke in absolutes. We will change healthcare, never leaving room for uncertainty. Bankman-Fried, on the other hand, approached from the opposite direction. He flooded the internet with self-deprecating honesty. He joked about sleeping on beanbags in the office. He talked about ethics, risk, and even his political donations. That kind of transparency disarmed critics. It's the old magician's trick. Distract the audience with openness so they don't notice what's hidden. Let's talk about another essential piece: jargon. When Holmes used medical terminology like nanotainers or microfluidic analysis, few people actually understood what she meant. But the lack of understanding worked in her favor. It created an aura of genius. SBF did the same with crypto lingo. He threw around terms like yield farming, liquidity crunch, and arbitrage loops. Unless you worked in finance, it sounded like wizardry. And who argues with a wizard who seems to be making everyone rich? You see, there's a strange rule in hype culture. The harder something is to understand, the more valuable it appears. Investors assume that if they can't understand it, it must be complex. And if it's complex, it must be advanced. But the truth is often the opposite. Complexity hides fragility. The more tangled the story, the easier it is to conceal cracks. Both Holmes and SBF built their empires on opacity disguised as sophistication. Let's zoom out for a moment. Why is hype so effective in technology? The answer is simple but uncomfortable. Technology runs on faith as much as on facts. Every major breakthrough starts as an act of belief. Will self-driving cars really work? Will artificial intelligence take our jobs or save us? No one knows. But belief fuels funding, which fuels experimentation, which fuels progress. The problem arises when the belief gets detached from reality. That's when hype becomes dangerous. It stops being a spark and turns into a smokescreen. In both cases, the smokescreen was thick. Holmes presented doctored demos to investors, claiming her device had already been used by the military. SBF flaunted fake financial numbers showing FTX as a model of efficiency and liquidity. Both of them weaponized numbers to create an illusion of solidity. Charts, metrics, and valuations became props, not data. In modern finance, a graph that goes up and to the right can silence almost any question. Here's the irony. The same media that later condemned them was once their biggest amplifier. Magazines crowned Holmes the new Steve Jobs. Talk shows celebrated SBF as the ethical billionaire who would save capitalism from itself. This circular hype machine, founders, media, investors, fed itself endlessly. Each actor validated the next. And once the loop starts spinning, it's almost impossible to stop until it crashes. You might be thinking, but surely someone must have seen the red flags? Yes, they did. Some analysts and whistleblowers warned early that Theranos' numbers didn't add up, or that FTX's business structure was tangled beyond reason. But here's the thing. When hype gets big enough, pointing out the truth can make you look like the crazy one. In a world obsessed with optimism, skepticism looks like bitterness. So the doubters were dismissed until it was too late. The investors, too, played their part. In the startup world, speed is everything. The faster you invest, the more chance you have to catch the next unicorn before it becomes famous. But quick decisions mean shallow research. That's why Holmes could raise hundreds of millions without peer-reviewed validation, and SBF could secure billions with little more than a spreadsheet. It wasn't analysis. It was gambling dressed as vision. Another critical piece of the hype machine is social validation. Humans are herd animals by. If everyone else seems convinced, we assume they must know something we don't. So when a well-known VC fund backs a company, others follow blindly. When celebrities endorse it, even skeptics soften their stance. It's the old, if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me logic. Both Theranos and FTX mastered this psychology. From ex-presidents to YouTubers, they enlisted every type of influencer to signal trust. And the public loved it, because hype feels good. It gives people hope, and in uncertain times, hope sells better than truth. During Holmes's rise, people desperately wanted healthcare that was cheaper and more accessible. During FTX's ascension, people wanted control, a way to escape traditional finance and inflation. Both founders told people exactly what they wanted to hear. It wasn't manipulation in the obvious sense. It was a mirror reflecting people's dreams back at them. Now, remember one of the golden rules of storytelling. Conflict makes things interesting. Holmes framed her mission as a battle against the bloated, outdated healthcare industry. SBF cast his mission as a fight against greedy banks and corrupt financial structures. Conflict gives heroes purpose, and both founders used that narrative arc perfectly. Every critic became part of the enemy. Every setback was framed as resistance from a world too slow to adapt. Sound familiar? It's classic underdog storytelling, turned into a funding strategy. Another angle to consider is how both founders blurred the line between company and identity. They weren't just leading their businesses, they were the businesses. Investors didn't believe in a product, they believed in a person. That bond between personality and valuation is powerful but dangerous, because once the founder falls, everything collapses with them. When you equate identity with innovation, a single scandal can turn a billion-dollar empire into dust overnight. There's one last ingredient that turbocharged the hype: timing. Both Theranos and FTX caught their industries at emotional peaks. In the early 2000s, biotech felt like the new frontier. People believed could cure anything. In the late 2000s and early 2020s, crypto fever took over, promising decentralized utopia. These environments don't just tolerate bold claims, they demand them. Caution sounds outdated in a revolution. So, what did all this create? Castles built on hype, structures grand enough to fool governments, journalists, and ordinary people alike. But castles built on sand eventually crack, no matter how grand the architecture looks. The problem isn't just the hype itself, it's the speed at which it grows. When everything is happening too fast to check, lies race ahead of truth, and by the time reality catches up, the damage is already done. Before we end this chapter, think about this paradox. Hype, while dangerous, is also necessary. Without it, innovation might never get funded. Without big promises, investors might never take risks. The trick isn't killing hype. It's learning to recognize when hype becomes a substitute for evidence. That's where Theranos and FTX crossed the line, when storytelling stopped being a tool and became the entire business model. We're about to move into darker territory because next comes the part where the math starts breaking down. Numbers stop matching stories, auditors start asking questions, and the illusion finally begins to lurch. So before jumping ahead, remember this simple lesson. If a business relies more on headlines than on honest results, you might not be looking at innovation. You might be looking at a well-decorated mirage. So far, we've seen how both Theranos and FTX built their empires on pure narrative power. But eventually, every story hits a stage where it must face something colder and harder than hype: numbers. Numbers don't care about charisma or vision. They have this annoying habit of telling the truth. And when they start to misbehave, it's usually the first sign that reality is knocking on the door. Let's start with Theranos. For years, Holmes had promised that her Edison devices could perform hundreds of blood tests with just a few drops. Yet inside the company's labs, the truth was messier. The devices consistently produced inaccurate results. Engineers were constantly recalibrating machines. Scientists were running tests again and again. And still, nothing worked reliably. Instead of facing those failures, Holmes and her partner Sunny Balwani decided to bury them under secrecy, claiming trade secrets while quietly switching to commercial analyzers made by other companies. Imagine that for a moment. A healthcare company selling revolutionary technology while secretly using old-school machines from Siemens to process patient samples. It's like selling a Tesla but delivering a bicycle under the hood. The deception was structural. Every test result that came out of Theranos' labs looked legitimate to customers and investors, but in reality, it was a performance carefully designed to mimic success. And those numbers, the ones that were supposed to validate the technology, had been doctored, adjusted, and manipulated to tell the story Holmes needed investors to hear. Now hop over to the Bahamas. It's the same movie, different setting. FTX's balance sheets were a riddle wrapped in smoke. Sam Bankman-Fried repeatedly told users their funds were safe, segregated, and never touched by third parties. In reality, billions were being funneled into Alameda Research, his sister company, to cover huge trading losses. At one point, internal reports showed gaps so wide that auditors couldn't even determine where customer assets ended and speculative bets began. But the illusion of growth continued. High valuations, headlines, and whispers of inevitable domination in global crypto trading. Both cases show how the language of numbers can be weaponized. Financial statements became tools of seduction rather than truth. For Holmes, numbers were marketing. For SBF, numbers were camouflage. And both used those numbers to buy time to attract new investors before the last ones started asking uncomfortable questions. It's the oldest trick in business fraud. When the numbers don't add up, drown your audience in complexity. Here's a curious thing. In the world of high-risk ventures, investors often accept temporary losses as long as there's a promise of exponential growth. That attitude allows founders to hide behind scaling pains. Holmes told backers that results would improve with time and that the military contracts were right around the corner. SBF told investors that the accounting mismatches were normal in young crypto exchanges, insisting everything was under control. In both cases, the story was not about what was, but what could be. And as long as that dream felt alive, no one dared to lift the curtain. Inside Theranos, the culture itself became allergic to truth. Employees who questioned results were labeled disloyal. Labs were kept separate, so scientists couldn't compare data between experiments. The top priority was not accuracy, but perception. Holmes believed that the first company to market would define the industry, even if the wasn't ready. So when internal quality reports raised alarms, they were rewritten or ignored. The few who spoke up were threatened with lawsuits or fired on the spot. Meanwhile, at FTX, the illusion of transparency hid structural chaos. Alameda Research, supposedly an independent trading firm, had special privileges on the FTX exchange. It could use customer deposits as collateral and withdraw unlimited funds. That's not just unethical, it's catastrophic. Imagine a bank letting its own hedge fund borrow your savings to bet on the market. When prices dropped sharply, the entire house of cards shook. But as long as crypto prices held up, the whole remained invisible. It's only when markets went down that the math began shouting its inconvenient truth. There's something psychologically fascinating about these parallel implosions. Both founders seem to have genuinely believed their own fabrications for a while. Holmes famously said, "First, they think you're crazy, then they fight you, then you change the world." SBF used to joke online that he didn't need to lie because he was too honest to fail. But conviction doesn't make lies true. When founders begin treating skepticism as betrayal, they replace accountability with delusion. And that's when the numbers turn from warning lights into detonators. Let's look closely at how each collapse began to take shape. For Theranos, the breaking point came when the Wall Street Journal published an investigation revealing that the company couldn't reproduce accurate test results. Suddenly, investors who once bragged about their involvement stopped returning calls. Regulators and lawyers began asking for the data that had been hidden or destroyed. Inside the company, panic set in. Those pristine spreadsheets turned into time bombs as auditors finally connected the dots between claims and laboratory chaos. For FTX, the trigger came in late 2022 when a leaked balance sheet exposed the enormous overlap between Alameda and FTX. People realized the exchange's supposed liquidity came largely from its own made-up token, FTT. It was like a casino printing chips to buy its own credibility. Confidence evaporated overnight. A classic bank run followed. Customers rushed to withdraw funds that no longer existed. The empire imploded within days. Now, you might think such large-scale manipulation would be impossible under proper supervision. And that's exactly the point. There wasn't any. In both cases, the firms avoided serious audits. Theranos relied on boutique accounting firms that lacked proper medical oversight. FTX operated largely offshore, outside the reach of financial regulators. Both mislabeled this strategy as innovation, a nice word for escape hatch. Avoiding scrutiny became part of their competitive advantage. Here's the irony. Had either company faced a rigorous audit early on, they might have survived by pivoting or admitting limitations. But success had become an addiction. Every time Holmes secured a new investor, she doubled down on secrecy. Every time SBF received fresh funding, he increased leverage. The higher the numbers went, the harder the fall became inevitable. When valuation replaces value, you're just counting the seconds before the music stops. There's also an important psychological dimension for investors. Many prefer the illusion of progress to the discomfort of bad news. In complex industries like biotech or crypto, the boundary between temporary setback and total failure is blurry. Founders learn to exploit that ambiguity. They sugarcoat problems saying, "We're almost there," or "It's just a calibration issue." But those small distortions accumulate until they define the entire enterprise. Lies in business rarely come with one big moment. They drip in slowly, like a leaky faucet, until the floor caves in. If you think this happens only in shady startups, think again. The mechanisms behind Theranos and FTX are baked into modern speculation itself. The race for the next big disruptor encourages founders to stretch definitions, exaggerate metrics, and delay truth. The market rewards bold projections more than honesty. In that environment, fake it till you make it becomes not just advice, it becomes survival strategy. But when you play with that kind of fire, you eventually burn everything, including yourself. Watch how both founders reacted when questioned. Holmes reverted to rehearsed answers, leaning on moral superiority. Saving lives justified everything. SBF leaned on philosophical jargon. Effective altruism made risk acceptable. Both used ideals to shield dishonesty, a dangerous mix of ethics and ego. It's no coincidence that both presented themselves as martyrs misunderstood by a cynical world. That's not leadership. That's manipulation dressed in morality. When regulators finally intervened, the facade crumbled under its own contradictions. Theranos' investors discovered that the company had been running less than a dozen tests internally while claiming hundreds. FTX users realized their balances were little more than digital illusions. The numbers didn't just fail to add up. They revealed entire parallel realities where logic had been suspended in favor of belief. The moment truth entered the stage, the illusion shattered completely. Here's something worth remembering. The collapse of numbers is never just financial. It's moral. Behind every fake figure are real people. Patients who received incorrect medical results. Young traders who lost life savings. Employees who built careers around lies they didn't create. The cultural damage goes beyond balance sheets. It erodes trust in the entire system. Every time a Theranos or FTX falls, it teaches the public to doubt innovation itself. Yet strangely, the cycle keeps repeating. New founders rise promising to be different. Investors swear they've learned their lesson and hype reignites. Why? Because we don't want to learn the hard truth, that due diligence is boring, that verification slows growth, and that slow growth feels unsexy in a world addicted to speed. Holmes and SBF exploited that impatience perfectly. They sold acceleration, and the world paid gladly, until the brakes failed. There's a lesson here for anyone watching. In finance or technology, the story will always sound better than the spreadsheet. But the spreadsheet always wins in the end. Numbers don't lie. People do. You can delay arithmetic for a while, hide it behind new funding rounds, or decorate it with buzzwords. But reality waits quietly. And when it finally arrives, it wipes away all the illusions in a single sweep. That's what happened to Theranos. And that's what happened to FTX. As this chapter closes, remember this pattern. Promise, perception, and then proof. The first two are easy. The third one is where most dreams die. Theranos and FTX never reached the proof stage because their creators replaced verification with faith. And when faith crashes into math, math always wins. In the next chapter, we'll see the full consequence. The spectacular collapse of two empires, and the end of the visionary myths that built them. Every empire built on illusion eventually hits its breaking point. For Theranos and FTX, that moment came fast, brutal, and public. There's a strange rhythm to collapses like these. For years, things look unstoppable. The hype grows, the money rolls in, and then suddenly, with one well-aimed question, everything comes crashing down. Elizabeth Holmes's world began to unravel when journalists started asking for actual data. The Wall Street Journal's investigation into Theranos exposed what insiders had known for years. The Edison machines didn't work. Not sometimes, not partially, but fundamentally. When the story broke, the reaction was seismic. Overnight, Holmes went from tech darling to corporate villain. Her once revered black turtleneck became a symbol of deceit rather than ambition. Inside Theranos, panic consumed the halls. Employees deleted emails, shredded paperwork, and tried to explain to themselves how it had all gone wrong. Doctors and patients who relied on Theranos blood tests suddenly realized the truth. Many results had been dangerously inaccurate. Real people were affected. Patients were told they had diseases they didn't, or worse, were told they were healthy when they weren't. The moral cost of the lie became impossible to hide behind marketing language. Outside, the corporate world recoiled. Investors who had bragged about being early backers went silent or sued. The same media that once labeled Holmes a genius now splashed her face across headlines with words like fraud, deception, and betrayal. It's astonishing how quickly admiration turns into outrage once the illusion fades. Everyone wants to claim they saw it coming, but very few truly did. The narrative shifted overnight, and the fall was merciless. Now jump to the Bahamas, where FTX's fall was even faster, a digital collapse measured in hours. One leaked balance sheet from Alameda Research started the domino effect. In the crypto world, where trust equals liquidity, one rumor can start a storm. And this one did. Within days, customers rushed to withdraw their funds. Billions of dollars vanished as the supposed financial fortress turned out to be built on vapor. Sam Bankman-Fried tried to calm the chaos with his usual nonchalant tone, tweeting that assets are fine and withdrawals are processing. They weren't. Within 48 hours, FTX froze withdrawals altogether. Users around the globe stared helplessly at screens where their supposed wealth was now trapped. A company once valued at tens of billions evaporated in less than a week, faster than anyone could imagine. If Theranos was a slow-motion crash, FTX was a nosedive straight into the ground. Both founders shared a bizarre similarity in how they faced collapse: denial. Holmes kept appearing in interviews long after the truth surfaced, claiming that her technology was misunderstood and that she was just ahead of her time. SBF mirrored that delusion by hopping onto Twitter Spaces and giving long, rambling interviews, trying to spin the story as a series of unfortunate errors rather than a betrayal. It's hard to tell whether they truly believed their own excuses or were simply too deep in the lie to stop pretending. The emotional contrast between their rise and fall is striking. Not long ago, both had been symbols of hope, visionaries breaking barriers and attracting star-studded investors. Now, they were symbols of greed and hubris. Former employees described shock, sadness, even guilt. Many had joined their companies because they wanted to make the world better. Instead, they found themselves helping maintain elaborate fictions. The disillusionment spread quickly, infecting not only investors but entire industries. When the dominoes began to fall, accountability followed fast. Regulators who once ignored these startups suddenly woke up. Investigations poured in. In Theranos' case, the Department of Justice charged Holmes and Balwani with multiple counts of fraud. In FTX's case, the list of indicted executives grew week by week, with SBF at the center. The veil of genius was ripped away, exposing poorly kept books, secret loans, and internal chaos that no real business could survive. The myth collapsed under the weight of facts. Let's pause to reflect on the mechanics of failure. Collapses like these don't happen in a single moment. They happen in layers. First comes internal doubt, a few employees asking questions, data not matching expectations. Then comes external curiosity, reporters probing, partners double-checking. Finally, come the lawsuits and regulators, the point where the storm is too big to contain. By the time the public learns the truth, the insiders have already known it, for months. For Theranos, that timeline stretched across years of silent suspicion. Insiders like lab directors had long warned that the devices didn't meet regulatory standards. Yet the fear of Holmes's retaliation kept them quiet. She cultivated a culture of fear and loyalty, where questioning the mission was tantamount to treason. So, when the end came, it wasn't just a legal failure, it was an emotional mutiny. A company full of dreamers realized they'd been following a mirage. At FTX, the structure of collapse was purely digital, but no less human. The same people who had worshipped SBF's intellect began leaking internal messages out of anger and embarrassment. Auditors discovered that nearly no internal controls existed. Bankman-Fried had granted personal loans worth hundreds of millions to top executives. Tens of thousands of investors were left with nothing more than digital screens filled with zeros. In a market already struggling with volatility, the FTX implosion triggered panic that rippled across the entire crypto economy. Beyond numbers and scandals, both stories share a deeper tragedy: the betrayal of trust. Trust is the invisible asset every business runs on. Once lost, it's impossible to rebuild. Customers stopped believing in blood testing startups. Crypto traders stopped believing in exchanges. Even ordinary people, far removed from biotech or crypto, started asking a quiet question: if these geniuses were lying, who else might be? It's this loss of faith that haunts entire industries long after the founders have vanished. There's a fascinating irony in the public's reaction, too. Before failure, we idolize visionaries precisely for taking risks and breaking rules. After failure, we demonize them for the same traits. Society loves the idea of genius, but hates the mess that comes with it. Holmes and SBF went from magazine covers to mugshots overnight, living proof that the line between innovation and fraud is frighteningly thin. The world that once cheered them on now turned into their jury. Now, let's talk about optics. Every collapse unfolds not just as a financial event, but as a theatrical one. There are Senate hearings, courtroom sketches, interviews with teary ex-employees. Each moment becomes part of the larger morality play. These stories remind us not only of greed, but of our collective hunger for drama. We love seeing villains fall, especially if we once helped crown them heroes. The same headlines that built them now dismantled them, frame by frame. Yet, behind the spectacle lies a quieter destruction. Employees lost livelihoods. Investors forfeited retirement savings. Customers were left angry and helpless. The emotional toll is rarely captured in headlines, but it lingers. A collapse isn't just a company dying, it's an ecosystem cracking. Startups struggle to find funding. Investors grow cautious. Regulators grow stricter, and innovation slows down. Each scandal leaves scars that shape the business landscape for years. In both cases, personal obsession played a central role. Holmes and SBF were no ordinary founders. They fused identity with mission. They believed, or at least acted as if they believed, that they alone knew what was best for humanity. That mindset can create unstoppable drive, but it also breeds isolation. Surrounded by yes men and shielded by fame, they stopped hearing the truth. The echo chamber turned fatal. Once you think you're too important to fail, you've already started the process of failing. As the legal cases unfolded, both founders tried to rewrite their narratives. Holmes hinted at victimhood, saying she had been pressured, misunderstood, or manipulated. SBF leaned on naivety, casting himself as a careless math nerd who simply lost track of billions. But juries tend to be immune to technocratic excuses. At some point, lies about broken blood machines and missing crypto become too overwhelming for even the best spin doctor to twist. When the verdicts came, they didn't just settle legal responsibility, they symbolized cultural closure. For Silicon Valley, it was a wake-up call. For the crypto world, a warning shot. Both industries realized that unchecked charisma and lack of oversight can destroy years of progress. After the trials, the same investors who once blinded themselves with optimism began calling for stronger regulations. Accountability, the one thing both founders avoided, became the new rallying cry. Still, there's something disturbing about how we keep repeating the same pattern. These stories are not anomalies. They're part of a cycle that Silicon Valley and speculative markets seem addicted to. A genius arrives, breaks conventions, rises too fast, then crashes. We shake our heads, promise it won't happen again, and then start searching for the next prodigy. It's almost ritualistic. The fall is not the exception. It's the punctuation mark that defines the sentence. Looking back, it's hard not to wonder what would have happened if someone had forced Holmes or SBF to slow down. What if an investor had demanded transparent audits? What if employees had felt safe to speak up earlier? The answer might not have been salvation, but the damage would have been smaller. Instead, their respective industries chose acceleration over accuracy, until the speed itself became the weapon that destroyed them. So here's the paradox. Both Theranos and FTX collapsed because they succeeded too well at pretending. Their illusions became so convincing that they couldn't escape them. By the time truth exposed the rot, the myths had already gone global. Every tweet, every magazine cover, every investor pitch built the walls higher. The fall, then, wasn't sudden. It was the only logical outcome of years spent running from reality. And as we close this chapter, take a breath and think about the archetype that both stories created. The fallen visionary. Once loved, now vilified. Remember their faces, not for the crimes alone, but for what they reveal about us. We celebrate bravery until it crosses into recklessness, and we worship innovation until it becomes deception. The story of the rise and fall of Holmes and SBF isn't just about them. It's about the fragile line we all walk between ambition and delusion. By now, you've seen how Theranos and FTX crashed under the weight of lies and misplaced faith. But here's a deeper question. Why do we, over and over again, fall for the same type of founder? Why do billions of dollars keep flowing into the hands of people who promise miracles before they even have mechanisms? The answer lies in something bigger than individual fraud. It lies in the myth of the visionary founder, an invention as powerful as any piece of technology. Let's face it, we love geniuses. Silicon Valley has built an entire religion around them. From Steve Jobs to Elon Musk, from Zuckerberg to Bezos, these figures aren't just business people. They're treated as prophets of progress. They wear hoodies instead of suits, talk about purpose instead of profit, and make failure sound like a noble rite of passage. But wrapped in all that glamour is a dangerous idea, that being visionary means being above rules. Elizabeth Holmes and Sam Bankman-Fried fit that archetype perfectly. Holmes positioned herself as the spiritual heir to Jobs. Same black turtleneck, same minimalist tone, same talk about changing humanity. SBF, on the other hand, styled himself as the anti-CEO, scruffy, distracted, too busy thinking about saving the world to care about his own messy apartment. Different aesthetics, same message. I'm not like ordinary people, so ordinary rules don't apply. That's the essence of what makes the cult of founders so magnetic, the illusion of exceptionalism. The myth starts early. Investors, desperate for the next breakthrough, look not just for products, but for profits. They want someone who can create belief out of thin air. In the world of startups, belief is currency. A charismatic founder doesn't need proof. They just need conviction. Once enough people believe, capital follows like gravity. It's not even about manipulation. It's about narrative momentum that becomes unstoppable. This culture isn't accidental. It's built into the very DNA of tech capitalism. The startup ecosystem rewards storytelling because imagination drives value long before profits appear. So if a founder can articulate a vision big enough, something that sounds poetic or revolutionary, people stop asking boring questions like, "Does this work?" and start asking more exciting ones like, "How soon can I invest?" The line between inspiration and delusion vanishes in the glow of potential returns. Holmes understood that perfectly. She weaponized empathy and idealism. "Wouldn't you want to save lives?" became her moral shield against doubt. Anyone who questioned her was cast as cynical, even cruel. SBF used similar tactics, but wrapped them in philosophy. He called it effective altruism, the idea of making the most money possible so you could donate it to the greatest good. On the surface, it sounded noble. In reality, it turned ethical shortcuts into moral obligations. After all, if you're saving the world, who cares about a few rules along the way? There's also the illusion of authenticity that drives these cults. Holmes pretended to be machine-like, cold, efficient, visionary. SBF performed the opposite role, chaotic, self-deprecating, and real. Both styles cater to investors' fantasies about genius. We project our hopes onto these figures like screens. When someone seems to think on a higher plane, we assume their flaws are just side effects of brilliance. But what if those quirks are actually warning signs? You see, the cult of the founder thrives in ecosystems allergic to skepticism. In traditional industries, oversight exists at every step: audits, checks, compliance officers. In the tech world, questioning a charismatic founder is often seen as resistance to innovation. "You just don't get it" becomes the ultimate weapon. That's how both Holmes and Bankman-Fried kept skeptics at bay. Their confidence was treated as proof, their youth as disruption, and their secrecy as genius. It's worth noting that society doesn't create these idols by accident. They fill a psychological need. In uncertain times, we crave figures who promise clarity and control. When economies wobble or institutions seem broken, a lone genius offering simple solutions feels comforting. Theranos promised to fix healthcare. FTX promised to fix finance. Both offered faith in a more righteous future. And people clung to that faith because it made chaos feel meaningful. What turns admiration into cultism is the erosion of accountability. In normal companies, boards challenge CEOs. In cult companies, boards worship them. Holmes stacked her board with famous names, generals, diplomats, and politicians who added prestige but no technical oversight. SBF surrounded himself with friends who barely understood finance, many of them living in the same Bahamas penthouse. Both operated inside echo chambers where doubt was unwelcome. And when doubt disappears, corruption follows naturally. But here's the paradox. The same traits that create breakthrough innovation often mirror those that breed downfall. Visionaries question rules, break norms, and bet everything on intuition. Those instincts are vital for invention, but deadly when unmanaged. The difference between a hero and a fraud is not IQ, it's self-awareness. When founders start believing their own mythology, they cross the invisible line from rebellion to delusion. They stop experimenting with reality and start rewriting it. Media plays a massive role in amplifying that delusion. Journalists, always hungry for the next big disruptor, turn founders into celebrities. Profile pieces blur the line between reporting and worship. Image replaces analysis. When a founder gets too much attention, every headline becomes an oxygen line feeding their legend. The result? Accountability suffocates while ego expands. And both Holmes and SBF were media darlings until the headlines turned against them. There's something deeper in how these stories appeal to us emotionally. We want to believe in saviors because the alternative, slow, complex progress, feels boring. Real change often comes from teams, bureaucracy, and incremental work. But that doesn't make for viral articles. One genius with a black turtleneck or messy hair is far easier to idolize. So, at a cultural level, we keep falling for the myth, not because we're stupid, but because we're addicted to simplicity wrapped in charisma. If you look closely, the cult of the founder mirrors religion in its structure. There's the prophet, who delivers revelations about a better future. There are disciples, employees, and investors, who convert faith into funding. And there are rituals, product launches, conferences, and keynotes designed to reaffirm belief. When the prophet eventually falls, believers experience something close to grief. They feel not just financially betrayed, but spiritually abandoned. The crash of faith hurts more than the loss of money. Let's consider the emotional economy of this phenomenon. Charismatic founders give people belonging. Working at Theranos or FTX wasn't just a job, it was a mission. Employees called themselves pioneers. Every late night, every ethical compromise felt justified in service of a higher cause. That's how cult dynamics work. They replace individual judgment with collective devotion. By the time reality collapses the dream, people have already wrapped their identities around it. The investor class isn't immune either. Many venture capitalists secretly crave meaning as much as profit. Investing in world-saving technologies validates their self-image as enlightened patrons rather than gamblers. That's why moral storytelling sells. A founder selling a blood analyzer or trading platform wouldn't have captivated billions. But one selling a better world absolutely would. Money chases meaning, and meaning is the easiest thing to counterfeit convincingly. What's striking is how both Holmes and SBF exploited the same emotional triggers: urgency and destiny. If we don't move fast, Holmes would say, people will die. SBF echoed that sentiment in different words. If we don't act now, billions will miss their chance to fix injustice. Urgency suppresses caution. When the future feels at stake, people stop asking hard questions. That's not manipulation. That's human psychology weaponized. Even regulators play into this cycle. Governments like the optics of backing the next big thing. Approving a hyped innovation looks good politically, so oversight often gets delayed. Silicon Valley learned that it's easier to seek forgiveness than permission. By the time laws catch up, the damage is already global. Theranos exploited medical loopholes. FTX exploited jurisdictional gaps. Both weaponized regulatory lag as a strategic advantage. So, how do we stop building new cults? The answer isn't destroying ambition, it's decoupling ambition from deification. Startups thrive when innovation is grounded in verification. Vision is valuable, but only when paired with transparency. We need founders who are bold but humble, and investors who celebrate diligence more than disruption. That balance might sound boring compared to charismatic chaos, but it's the surest path to progress that lasts. Think about this. If Holmes and SBF hadn't been idolized so early, their lies might have been caught sooner. Accountability could have saved their companies, maybe even redirected their talents into genuine innovation. But when you're worshipped, feedback feels like betrayal. The absence of criticism doesn't feel like peace. It feels like silence before collapse. Both founders learned that the hard way, and they took thousands of people down with them. As this chapter comes to a close, remember that the cult of the visionary founder says as much about us as it does about them. We build these altars collectively, with our money, attention, and desire for miracles. Holmes and SBF weren't just inventors of deception. They were reflections of a system addicted to belief. The next time a genius promises the world, maybe the smarter move isn't joining the congregation, but quietly asking, can you prove it? Because as history keeps showing, if worship replaces due diligence, the sermon always ends in ruin. So, after all the hype, the lies, and the collapse, what do we actually learn from the twin disasters of Theranos and FTX? Because make no mistake, these weren't isolated scandals. They were symptoms of a deeper pattern in how modern capitalism rewards storytelling over substance. The real question now is whether we can recognize the next one before it explodes in our faces. The first lesson is painfully simple. Skepticism isn't cynicism. We've been trained to think that questioning a visionary makes us negative or small-minded. But healthy doubt is what protects both investors and innovators from self-destruction. Asking for proof shouldn't kill innovation. It should make it stronger. Both Holmes and SBF exploited people's fear of looking foolish. No one wanted to be the person who didn't get it. That silence was their oxygen. The second lesson is about transparency. Both companies operated behind dense walls of jargon, secrecy, and mystique. In modern tech, transparency often gets framed as optional, something nice to offer once you've succeeded. In reality, it's the foundation of trust. A good idea survives inspection. A bad one needs fog to survive. The moment you find a company allergic to audits or allergic to questions, you're probably staring at trouble waiting to happen. There's also the matter of speed. We live in an era obsessed with moving fast. Blitzscaling, disruption, and growth hacking all sound glamorous, but speed hides flaws. Both Theranos and FTX grew faster than their internal controls could handle. Holmes wanted to deploy machines in Walgreens before verifying they worked. SBF wanted to expand globally before establishing real accounting systems. Growth became the story, and the story became the business. The faster they ran, the harder they crashed. But what if the real problem isn't founders? It's the system that builds them. Silicon Valley's entire economy depends on belief in exponential potential. Venture capitalists hunt for moonshots, not steady progress. Media outlets sell inspiration, not caution. Even governments decorate innovators with awards long before results are proven. The game rewards vision over verification. In that environment, deception isn't an accident. It's an almost inevitable byproduct of the incentives themselves. That brings us to the next lesson. Incentives shape behavior. Holmes and SBF responded rationally to a culture that rewards confidence more than competence. If lies get you funding and humility gets you ignored, guess which one wins? It's not enough to punish individual fraudsters. We have to rethink the system that celebrates them until the day they fail. Accountability shouldn't start only after collapse. It should be baked in from the beginning. Investors have their own lessons to learn. Many of them claim they were shocked by what happened, but in truth, they ignored the most obvious signals. No audited financials, no independent verification, promises that defied physics or basic math. In crypto, people trusted flashy logos instead of balance sheets. In biotech, they trusted charisma instead of clinical trials. Due diligence became optional in the rush to join the next big wave. The remedy is simple. Slow down, verify, and never confuse publicity with proof. For regulators, the path forward is more complicated. Oversight must evolve as fast as innovation does. In biotech, we learned that partial regulation, where a company operates just outside medical jurisdiction, invites disaster. In crypto, we saw how operating offshore avoided all accountability. The challenge is to design guardrails without killing experimentation. Smart regulation doesn't suffocate innovation. It filters out con artists masquerading as pioneers. But here's where it gets personal. Because it's not just investors and regulators who get fooled. Ordinary people, too, play a role in these cycles. Whether it's buying the tokens, praising the genius on social media, or just admiring success stories, our collective fascination fuels the fire. We've built a culture that confuses wealth with wisdom. The more zeros in an account, the smarter we assume someone must be. That illusion makes us easy targets for every visionary with a slick pitch deck and a TED-style voice. So, what can you do to not fall into that trap? Start by paying attention to patterns. Whenever someone promises a revolution, look at the mechanism, not the mission. Ask, how does it work? Who verifies it? What happens if it fails? Truth withstands questions. Hype dodges them. You don't need to be a financial analyst to spot red flags, just someone curious enough to pause when everyone else is clapping. History shows that the next big scandal will look different but feel the same. The language changes. Maybe it's AI this time, or green energy, or brain chip startups, but the structure repeats. A charismatic founder, a complicated technology, massive investor enthusiasm, and a lack of accountability. The names change, the script doesn't. That means learning to recognize patterns is more valuable than memorizing past examples. Another takeaway is about emotion. Excitement is addictive. When everyone around you believes they've found the future, it's hard to stay sober. Cognitive bias makes you ignore warning signs if your tribe believes. Social proof, confirmation bias, and herd mentality. It all kicks in. Both the crypto and biotech bubbles ran on the same emotional energy that drives any religious movement. Hope can be beautiful, but when it replaces logic, it becomes blindness. One more thing. Let's not romanticize skepticism either. Not every big vision is a scam. Some really do change the world. But those that succeed tend to pair vision with evidence, not illusions. Look at legitimate innovators. They talk in experiments, not prophecies. Their breakthroughs can be tested, improved, or even criticized. The difference is not how loud they dream, but how clearly they measure reality. Belief without verification is faith. Belief with verification is There's also a role here for education. Financial literacy and critical thinking are not luxuries anymore. They're survival skills. People should understand the basics of how businesses, investments, and technology actually work. When someone claims to reinvent healthcare or democratize money, you should be able to decode what that means in plain terms. Empowerment begins with understanding. The less mystery, the fewer myths we fall for. If we dig deeper, though, these scandals teach more than market lessons. They hold moral ones. Holmes and SBF didn't start out dreaming of fraud. They dreamed of greatness. Somewhere along the way, ambition mutated into arrogance. The pressure to deliver miracles made them take shortcuts. And once you compromise once in service of a noble goal, the path back vanishes fast. The road to scandal is paved with good intentions, polished by ego, and accelerated by greed. Here's another uncomfortable truth. We, as a society, reward messianic narratives more than collective effort. Teams don't go viral. Individuals do. We admire the lone genius image, yet real progress almost always comes from collaboration. If we truly want to prevent another Theranos or FTX, we need to normalize humility. Founders surrounded by diverse critics instead of yes men. Success stories that celebrate processes, not personalities, are far healthier for markets and minds alike. The long-term damage of these scandals isn't just financial, it's psychological. They erode trust in innovation, in entrepreneurship, in institutions. Every time a visionary is unmasked, we collectively grow more skeptical of genuine innovation. That's tragic, because skepticism without hope breeds stagnation. The goal shouldn't be to distrust ambition, but to channel it through structures that make lying impossible. Transparency isn't bureaucracy. It's protection for dreamers who actually deserve belief. At this point, you might be wondering whether such change is even realistic. Can we really fix a system that rewards spectacle more than substance? Maybe not overnight, but awareness is the first layer of defense. The more people understand how hype cycles work, the less power those cycles have. Remember, frauds survive on collective inattention. Once enough people pay attention, even the most brilliant illusion starts to fade. Before we wrap up, let's consider a more personal angle. As individuals, whether you're an investor, creator, or consumer, every decision you make either feeds illusion or fosters integrity. Supporting companies transparent about their processes or demanding real accountability from tech giants creates ripple effects. Change doesn't always require revolutions. Sometimes it just starts by refusing to worship charisma over competence. Small acts of discernment are how systems evolve. And here comes the last, perhaps most important lesson. Innovation without ethics is a time bomb. Technology magnifies human intention. In the hands of arrogance, it amplifies violence. In the hands of humility, it amplifies progress. The future will always need dreamers, but dreamers who welcome scrutiny, not silence it. Imagine what Holmes and SBF could have truly built if they had let honesty, not ego, guide their empires. The tragedy wasn't that they dreamed too big. It's that they dreamed without truth. So next time you hear about the new revolutionary startup or the latest crypto genius, take a second. Ask questions, demand clarity, and follow the numbers. Admiration isn't wrong, but blind devotion always is. The next big scandal is already forming somewhere. It always is. But awareness turns us from audience members into analysts. Because when you strip away the fancy pitch decks, glossy media, and billionaire talk, the question remains simple. Does the story match the math? And that's the heart of it all. The pattern isn't destiny if you learn to read it. The lies only win when everyone chooses to believe them. History will keep giving us new Holmeses and SBFs, but it can also give us smarter spectators. So keep your curiosity sharp and your skepticism kind. Because in a world where stories move money, Truth is the only investment that never loses value.